Recording process, got it. Hoping that you can see this, the slide just fine and all that kind of thing. So the talk is transportation is for people, and I want to stress that people thing as we move through. And my big goal is for everyone in the room to understand what safe systems means and what Vision Zero means. And we're going to learn that they mean almost the same thing. And then I want to end on a hopeful note of the promise of today. And I mean that sincerely. There's a lot of promise that we can do fairly quickly as we move forward. So what we're talking about and what we're going to talk about later is sort of a slogan, is this idea of people first stuff. People first, other people call, or other locales call it people oriented, people centered, designing human-centered transportation systems. So while I'm talking this through, you can be thinking about, what does Homer Drawdown want to have as its slogan? I think one of these four would be really nice to use since it's already, out there in the world. But it's putting people at the forefront of how we think about transportation. All right. So you might have heard the saying that traffic engineers only care about vehicle movement. They don't care about people, they care about cars. And that's not exactly true. I mean, these are humans and they think about other people, but their directive is a little bit different typically if they're talking about vehicular transportation. So I wanted to cite some examples here from Homer that sort of can help us understand when we're talking about non-motorized transportation, what it means for us versus what it means for how somebody might look at vehicular transportation. So the slide you're looking at right now is a really nice graphic from the 2004 Homer non-motorized transportation and trail plan. And you can see the circles, the ovals, are all the places where people live or need to shop or need to visit or recreate, or schools and civic buildings. And we have all these links, right? And the heart of the non-motorized transportation plan is trying to figure out, how do you get people from where they are to where they want to be? And what comes out of that sort of thinking is that when you look at an intersection, for instance, this is the 2004 depiction of what Bartlett Street could look like at Pioneer Avenue. If you look at the details, it's really interesting. There's 10-foot travel lanes, which are narrow. There's an uphill bike lane. There's on-street parking. There are curb extensions to narrow the roadway for the safety of road users, or sorry, for the safety of pedestrians and protect them from road users. So it's a really inspiring sort of vision that comes out of the non-motorized plan that's looking at people first, people-centered plans. Of course, what we get is not that beautiful vision. This is Pioneer. It's a screen grab from a Google Maps taken from 2009, but I think you'll all agree it basically looks the same today. So there's a couple reasons why Pioneer looks like this. One, and you've probably heard it before, it's because this is state-owned, right? We can't do anything about it. That is only partially true, and I'll talk about that later. There's all sorts of options. There's never a we can't do this. There's only barriers that we need to cross, right? So one of those barriers is transportation planning. So a year after the 2004 non-motorized plan came out, the 2005 Homer area transportation plan came out. And you can compare this early graphic to that other graphic that was thinking about, like, how do we link people together and spaces together? And here you have one of the guiding principles for the entire transportation plan, which is a table depicting the delay and level of service for intersections. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I just want to emphasize how that non-motorized plan was thinking about people and how they get around. And the transportation plan is focused on intersections. what level of service means, LOS, basically is how long do people need to wait? How long do vehicles need to wait, I should say? How long do vehicles need to wait before they can proceed through an intersection? And Julie, you're welcome to correct me on some of this stuff if I don't get it right. They get graded like in school on an A to F scale. A is functioning great, F is not functioning great. So the level of service really dictates the kind of thoughts that you're going to have about what things might look like. This is the depiction of Homer that ends up in that document as they're thinking about these intersections and level of service, and they're looking at traffic volumes, and they're trying to figure out the puzzle of how do you move vehicles through these corridors. And what you end up with is a map like this. So this map, you can all tell this is Homer's core downtown area. The pink dots that you see are recommended roads to go in. So what you're viewing is basically an engineer's perspective that Fairview needs to go all the way through past the high school and down to East End. We need intersection traffic signals all over the place. And we need Grubstake to go through clear to Main and actually connect to Bartlett. So that's sort of the perspective that they're coming in, as well as Poopdex coming all the way through. Leave that up for a second, just so you can sort of get a feel for what that looks like. So how do we start talking about people-centered transportation? One is through Vision Zero. So I have this really great friend, her name is Erica Briggs, and about 10 years ago in Michigan, Erica came to me and she said, hey, you're a bicycle advocate, I'm a pedestrian advocate. Have you heard about Vision Zero? And I said, kind of, what? She's like, yeah, okay, so the goal is we're going to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries. And I'm like, come on, that's not going to, that is so pie in the sky, it sounds silly. And she said, no, it's this thing. And if you look at statistics, it totally worked. In Sweden, in 1997, they had this whole program where Parliament, and I said, time out. You had me at Sweden. There's no way this is going to work. Well, she kept pestering me. And in 2014, she said, hey, look. New York City just embraced the Vision Zero challenge. They're going to redo their streets to make them people safe. And so I started and she started looking into this more. And the deeper you dive, the more you see how expansive and how space changing this system can be. This is the Vision Zero action plan for the city of Houston. That's their cover. It's just an inspiring way of thinking about transportation and noticing the people element, that it's not just about vehicles, but it's about shared road spaces. And the more we dug, the more we realized that it's everywhere now. These are screen grabs that I took from last night, maybe 2 nights ago. The interesting thing about this, Vision Zero Chicago, Vision Zero DC, Tempe, Cleveland, Tacoma, these are largely screen grabs from .gov websites. This is not pie in the sky advocates dreaming with a Facebook page. This is officially endorsed perspectives from these various cities. So once we decided to dive in Ann Arbor, where I was living, we convinced the city to not only embrace Vision Zero ideals, but to actually use them as the grounding principle for their comprehensive transportation plan. And what's important to note here is that it's a comprehensive transportation plan, meaning it looks at all modes at the same time, which is similar, fortunately, to what Homer's next transportation plan is going to be focusing on. It's the elements that we bring together, particularly vehicular and non-motorized together. So one of the things that folks might be thinking is, Alaska, we're different. we can't really, I don't know how that's going to work here. Fortunately, we have Anchorage that we can rely on as sort of an anchoring point as we enter these discussions. All right, so what does Vision Zero actually entail? We're just going to use Anchorage's graphic here. This is from their webpage. There's 5 basic principles. Human life and health is a priority. Traffic deaths and severe injuries are preventable. We are human and make mistakes. Speed is a critical factor. And responsibility is shared. So there's 2 things that I want to point out with this graphic. One is that the we are human and make mistakes is the grounding principle for Vision Zero, and how people-oriented, people-centered thinking about transportation starts. We're human. Old school thinking was keep everybody separated, make overpasses, whatever you need to do. But the reality was that there's conflict zones. The other thing I want to point out is that final handshake. The responsibility is shared. What's important here is that it's not responsibility that's shared only between like cars and people when they need to pay attention and be nice to people. It's between system designers and road users. Like, we got to figure out this system is what Vision Zero is really about. So humans make mistakes all the time. Vehicle speed determines outcomes. We need to design roads for less speed. Those are the sort of takeaways to understand Vision Zero. This graphic, it really changed how I thought about safety. And that's because these numbers are not very high, 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour. These are speeds that we see in Homer all the time. This is not interstates going 80 miles an hour, where our primary concern is when it comes to walkability and pedestrian safety. So if a car is going 20 miles an hour, the likelihood of fatality or severe injury is pretty low. At this point, I'll also say by severe injury, they're talking serious life-altering injuries. Like, the list includes paralysis. It's not just you got to put something in a splint. This is potentially life in a chair or you get massive scar. These are life-altering events and the likelihood that they will happen. 30 miles an hour, it's basically the flip of a coin. Are you going to survive this and live how you were living before, or are you not? Is this going to be devastating? At 40 miles an hour, things get far worse. It's almost 80%. So you can see as the speed increases, the injury rate does so exponentially. The faster it goes, the higher it goes more quickly. These figures that we're looking at right now, I'm going to leave this up here for a little bit while I talk for a second. These figures are the best data that people have been able to collect so far. This is the most accurate that I could find. There are other earlier studies that were even more sort of devastating on fatality rates. This is one that I trust to convey what the outcomes are. What is something that we need to keep in mind, the figures that this study is based on are basically like normal vehicles, sedans, like pickup trucks maybe. They're not talking about big vehicles moving through these corridors and how that impacts. The actual study that's cited at the bottom does, and the numbers only increase in a really scary fashion once you start talking about big vehicles. The other thing that they looked at is what happens to aging populations when they're struck by a vehicle. And that 77% under 40 miles an hour, that's basically a fatality rate for an elderly person being struck by a F-150, for instance. So that's the sort of eye-opening moment that I had, that we're talking about fairly low speeds compared to what maybe you'd assume would be happening. This is a good graphic that shows what I mean and what the study means by vehicle size determining injury outcomes. So it's pretty obvious to see that the sedan on the right is just not going to have the same impact as the large vehicle on the left. The strike zone is different. You get pulled under the truck, you get thrown above. The kinetic energy involved is just a lot less when it comes to a sedan. I'll also remind you that you all are probably very aware that Homer has a whole lot of trucks. So something to keep in mind as we talk. So key talking points so far. Vision Zero, it's an explicit goal for 0 fatalities or serious injuries on roadways. And the three main principles: humans make mistakes, speed severely injures and kills, and that safety is an ethical priority. Okay, so Vision Zero and safe systems design. We're going to move into safe systems. What I'm going to tell you is that it's basically the same thing, but it focuses more on planning and design. That's mostly what you need to know. Other than safe systems is what the Department of Transportation calls it. They don't call it Vision Zero, they call it safe systems. Today we commit to our goal of 0 deaths, right? So this is the official language from the Department of Transportation. And in fact, Streets blog responded the day that was announced. Wait a second, did Vision Zero just go national? And the answer is pretty much yes. Principles of the safe system approach. You can hear how similar they are. Humans make errors. Humans are vulnerable to injury. Responsibility is shared. No death or serious injury is acceptable, and that we need to be proactive versus reactive in addressing dangerous road situations.
Excuse me, Brad.
Yes.
How many fatalities has Homer suffered from this?
To be honest, I haven't looked at the traffic data yet, and I imagine not very many. I imagine maybe none. I don't know for sure. What I can tell you is that it's going to happen sooner than you might like to hear, because it's inevitable when you have cars and vehicles moving in such a way. The other thing is that Homer is on the cusp of having to increase its transportation systems to the point where more people walking, more people driving, the desire to have wider lanes and more traffic volume. If Sterling Highway, once you make that a 4-way through town, you will see injuries skyrocket, largely to pedestrians. Great question. I'm going to keep rolling here. So this is the safe systems approach, the slide you're looking at. This is the official Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration go-to now. This is how they are thinking about and trying to design streets. So it's not necessarily pie in the sky. It's not necessarily like feel good. It's an actual acknowledgement that we need safe speeds and safe roads to make sure that we have safe road users and a safe network. So key talking points so far. Vision Zero is just that explicit goal: 0 fatalities or serious injuries. Safe systems designs takes that to the next level and has an explicit commitment to design for Vision Zero. Humans make mistakes. Speed severely injures and kills. Safety is an ethical priority. And then safe systems says we have to design. So what does that mean for a town like Homer? This is a picture of Pioneer Avenue, right, that we looked at earlier with Bartlett. And, you know, some might be thinking, hey, Brad, that's a 25-mile-an-hour road. What's the big deal? So I'll admit, a week ago, I broke the law and I followed a full-size gravel hauler, fully loaded, that I got behind to see just how fast they go. Normally, I go about 20 miles an hour in Pioneer, just because I like to drive slow. I think it's fun. This gravel hauler got up to 33 miles an hour in front of the bookstore. And in front of the bookstore is in front of that crosswalk that is heavily used between the senior center and the non-motorized path behind the grog shop at Fedland. So that's an example of where, if it does happen, that there happens to be a pedestrian and a gravel hauler that's distracted and those two meet, that's going to end with a fatality. So this is a depiction of Hamburg, New York. This is a town that is south of Buffalo. The reason I bring it up is that a lot of times we might hear in the future, and we will hear it a lot, that it's different here in Alaska. We have snow, we have Pioneer, which serves a whole lot of trucks, right? We can't do it here like they do it elsewhere. This is US Route 62, south of Buffalo, connected to Niagara Falls. Back in 2009, the state DOT in New York said, hey, we need to come in and we need to open up your roadway system similar to Pioneer, maybe even turn it more like the bypass, 3 and 4 lanes, dedicated turn lanes, the whole bit. And the city said, no, no way. The city took it upon themselves to design and come up with a community desired feel for this downtown corridor. And what you see is what the city decided that they wanted, and they eventually convinced the state of New York Department of Transportation to put it in. So there's a couple of things that we notice. One is that it already feels a lot safer in terms of people. The other way that it connects to people, though, is an emphasis that Vision Zero doesn't carry, and that I think Drawdown should. One is that these sorts of designs encourage people to not drive. It encourages people to park and walk, or just walk downtown in the first place. The other thing it did is improve the economic vitality of this downtown. This downtown was sort of failing at the time that this was installed. Within a few years, all of these property values doubled, and the building permit requests went through the roof. It went from like 15 a year to 93. So its transportation networks designed for people do more than just increase safety, but they increase walkability and desirability to be there, and they're an economic engine in that way. So, you know, we're also going to hear, well, Brad, that's one example. That's Buffalo, New York. They're not a tourist destination. They don't have to deal with the kind of traffic that we do. This is US Highway 26 going through Jackson, Wyoming. They see about the same amount of snow as we do. This is a gateway. This highway is the gateway to Teton National Park as well as Yellowstone, right? They are able to figure it out. This is Truckee, California. If you're not familiar with Truckee, California, you probably have heard about the Donner Party, at least back in the Oregon Trail days. Donner Pass sees triple the amount of snow that Homer does. Homer is somewhere around 70 inches a year. Donner Pass in Truckee sees 207 inches of snow a year. So they've figured out a way to deal with snow, keep it a mountain town, have traffic going through, and you can see the economic vitality that's going to increase. This is Frisco, Colorado. It's a town that I'm not terribly familiar with yet. This picture makes me want to go there, though. This is a gateway to most of the ski resorts, Vail, for instance, in the Colorado Rockies. I think it's Vail. Breckenridge for sure. What I want to highlight here just for a second, though, is the paint. I'm drawn by the paint in this intersection. Mm-hmm. And this is what I really want to emphasize with the promise of today. All that other stuff that we've been looking at, all those designs, that's expensive stuff that takes a long time to put in. Paint is easy and fast.
So, Brad?
Yes?
We've gone past 20, but I know that we have 15 minutes for the question and answer, so we'll be down to 10 or something in about 3 minutes.
I will go a little bit faster, and I'm almost done, and you'll get the gist of this. So this is just using paint and planters to change a roadway. This is using, it's called post and paint or a quick build. Hey, let's try it. What if we narrow it down? These are easy to remove if it doesn't work out. You just keep it flexible. So the other thing I'll say real quick, what happens when you start thinking about people instead of just cars? One of the things Jeff Speck recommends is to remove center lines on neighborhood streets. From a Vision Zero perspective, this makes total sense. Speed drops by 7 miles an hour, approximately. The photo on your left, end 45 speed limit, that gets up to 55. That's Cabrillo Highway. On your right is Herndon in front of the senior center. The two look remarkably similar. The senior center wants 15 miles an hour through that corridor. Cabrillo Highway is actually Pacific Coast Highway, like the Pacific Coast Highway in California. So it's those design elements that you see that are interesting. This is Danville or Danview, just up the road from where I am. This depiction of the center lanes is looking east from Fairview. The picture on the right is Danview looking west from Fairview. So you can see it's the same street. It's just how it's painted that makes this dramatic change. Ambiguity is gone on the left. It increases speed and it encourages people not to walk, frankly, because there's no space to go. On the right, people are parking. There's more flexibility in where you can go. Probably the best example, and this is honestly one of my favorite places in town to walk and bike, is Old Town. And if you notice, there's no center lane in this 2009 picture. It is an inviting, welcoming, people-centered street, ironically, and it doesn't have sidewalks. Okay, I'm gonna wrap there and unshare my screen and we can talk. Does somebody want to, I haven't been following the chat because I've been sort of blinded by my screen share. Does somebody want to sort of?
Well, there's a conversation in the chat going on about the durability of a paint solution. I agree, it is beautiful. I've seen that actually in Frisco.
Yeah, the durability is basically one season in Homer. It's going to get all scraped away. And that's pretty much true of center lines as well. I talked to Jan Kaiser about my displeasure with center lines, and she said, well, the good thing is they're going to be gone after winter. We can rethink it all. And she's open to that sort of thing.
In neighborhoods in Portland, they have painted places like that too. But I mean, it's an opportunity to have an annual repainting party.
Cool.
There have been paintings on the streets here in Homer, but they haven't even lasted a year.
Where?
I'm trying to think where it was. I think Bunnell did it. There was a big blue, purple somewhere in, I can't remember exactly where it was, but it didn't last very long.
We did 2 murals at the intersections of Bunnell and Main, and then the intersection of Bunnell and right in front of Two Sisters. And they lasted the winter, but it was the iciest winter we had had in a long time. And we really just used house paint. But with kind of, it's more, I think, about not necessarily having a permanent street mural, but rather changing the way we use those spaces and allowing people to envision, like I live up on Bayview, which is this big straight thing that people speed to the hospital, even though it's 100% a residential street. And if there was concentric circles, it makes it, it would allow people to maybe to begin to explore that space as a pedestrian and not like cower on the side of the little like 3-inch grass strip where it's not paved. I mean, I think it's not really about the permanence of the mural itself, although one day we could do that and we could get the glass blasters, DOT people, I'm sure would love to have a creative project to do, but rather to help us, almost like through performance and practice, change the way we use those spaces.
Brad, I wondered if you had a graph or something correlating the speed with the likelihood of an accident with a pedestrian. You had the speed versus likelihood that the pedestrian would get injured or killed.
I would have to dig. I don't recall. I mean, there's been interesting studies. It hasn't been necessarily speed, but the one of the more interesting studies in terms of vehicle and pedestrian conflict is the way that the pedestrian is moving through the space. So I'm gonna just segue to not answering your question. I'll take a deeper dive. I haven't seen one. Um, but if a person is walking against traffic and they're approaching a intersection where someone's trying to turn right, the likelihood of them being struck, especially on a bicycle, is like 11 times higher than if they were going with the flow of traffic. And it makes total sense, right? When you approach an intersection and you're driving and you want to turn right, you only look to your left to make sure it's clear. You don't even think about looking to your right. So that's the only thing I could think of in terms of that type of study and risk. So I see in the chat that a couple people are putting thoughts about mosaics and cobblestone intersections and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. I can share later some of these installations that they're doing now. They use different bricks essentially and pavers to create a similar sort of artistic design so that you have a similar effect. Basically, you need to convince people that what they're driving on isn't just for them. You need to make it narrow. You need to make it interesting. And that's the whole sort of theme of that design process when you design for people oriented. There was somebody else who mentioned paint leaching into the environment. 100%, we got to think about that, right? We're going to have to find something that's sustainable, but that we can also use.
Someone put a really huge link into the chat. What is that? I can't even see the whole link.
Those are pictures of Frisco and their street paintings. It's more than just that one. There are
cool.
many, many.
I really like that idea, Brad, too, of thinking about not painting a street in your centerline depiction, and that's, and then using that with other signage. I think some of the other things that aren't necessarily about street painting, but that we could also explore as a community are even almost more like street designations. Like there are terms like shared streets or living streets, and you have these kind of signs that aren't the roadway that show like a little person and a kid playing with a ball and a person on a bicycle, and really indicate in clear ways that that whole space is used for people, that you can actually like literally play soccer there, and you can drive your car 10 miles an hour, and you can ride your bicycle or walk. And I think there are places in Homer that we could that are easy to like try that, because people have to grow the like idea and understand what that means. As we can't even handle roundabouts in this country yet. Like we're still working that one out. And then if that's successful on Grubstake and Klondike, maybe it can be used up in Bayview, which is a little bit more of a thoroughfare, or maybe it can be used on Danview and Soundview in sections. And so there are other things beyond paint, but all grounded in that people-oriented or people-first or people-centered transportation. And I did have a meeting with the Homer Trails Alliance yesterday, and Charlie Barnwell, who's on the Planning Commission, said he works for Kinney, and even though they are, these are the folks who are going to do our transportation plan, and even though they've come a long way and learned the language, they are traffic engineers. They're going to not be able to resist identifying LOSs and putting tables of how fast people need to move through. So we have to have a equally strong language to respond.
So I have a question. Do any cities do, I know that there's places where the street is closed for a little bit and it's only walkable. And I also know that we have delivery trucks and stuff, but could there be like a time where you actually put up barriers and this section is closed to traffic for a certain amount of time, so that you're not going to stop all those delivery trucks, but that you can pull out some tables or whatever, or just have it be an area? And I'm thinking about the college and the the WKFL park and stuff, and if every once in a while that was just barriered off and closed and people were allowed to mingle right in the middle of the street, that might be awesome.
So there are examples of that a lot. In Ann Arbor specifically, they would close downtown Main Street, which is a pretty busy place. They'd close it for the evening, like from 3 until 8 o'clock in the evening or something like that.
Oh, nice.
There's other examples too where they close it for the weekend. To be honest, Adele, I'd love to talk to you about having a block party down on Bunnell Street. Like, oh my gosh, that'd be so fun. And it can't be that bad because it's not through traffic that we're dealing with. The other thing I'll say on that topic is that so the 4th of July parade this year, it was amazing to watch for the first time. I was actually in the parade 7 years ago. My in-laws were the marshals of the parade, so we came up to be a part of it. But I was in the parade, so I didn't get to witness how it was unfolding. It was amazing to watch that as the last paraders went down the street, the vehicles were already lining up. Like the streets were already open to just through traffic. Whereas in Ann Arbor, our 4th of July parade, and similar in Iowa City, the street would just be closed for hours, and we'd get on our bikes and have a heyday. We'd do bike races, like just behind the scenes, because we knew the streets were going to be closed. So there's ways to do it. We shut it down. We shut Pioneer down for the parade. So it's just a matter of will to have it go for longer, if that's what we want. Find the street that we think would be really cool to do.
Hey, Brad, speaking of Pioneer, you mentioned briefly in your talk about it being a state road, but there are ways around that. And I know you cited Buffalo City kind of just saying, no, we're not going to do that. But what ways around that? I guess briefly, because we're getting kind of late, but are there for us?
So the biggest barrier is the state, and you'd have to convince them to do it how you want to do it. But the state doesn't want that road. They don't want any roads. They want all of those off of their, debts that they have. They would gladly give over Pioneer to the city of Homer. It's just a matter of whether or not the city of Homer wants to take on that financial burden. For me, I'd like to know what the actual numbers are, and I've asked Jan in Public Works, what would it take? Somebody just spent a ton of money connecting West Hill to Fairview. So we have a new street that we're going to have to maintain. Pioneer from the bypass to Lake Street is exactly 1.0 miles, according to Google Maps. And from Main Street to Lake, it's 0.6 miles. I can't imagine that would sink the city budget just to take it on. So I think that's the easiest thing to do, honestly.
So we have run officially out of our time. If anybody has a question burning.
I'll just say that I love talking about this stuff. It's an obsession. It's not even a hobby. So feel free to email me. I can put my phone and email in the chat so everybody can do so.
And also that we'd like to, we've been talking about maybe having more of these kinds of conversations, having a focus on bicycles, having a focus on, other things. And so any ideas that people have about, and specifically speakers too, we'd like to see that kind of learning happen over the course of this year.
What's spinning around in my head right now is sort of process-oriented questions, like what is it that we can accumulate and really get clear on our language and our vision and our wish list for the transportation master plan, and what are the things that we can and that we'd deliver to the city versus the things that we say, okay, we can just do this in collaboration with the city, but we don't need to wait for a finalized master plan. This is a project that is something we can start taking on this year or next year.
I think there's two things, just real quick, Satchel, that we can keep in mind. One is that I think we should be thinking about, they're called a quick build installment. What would we want to try somewhere? And can we build the resources to do it? A lot of examples just use planters. It's not hard to do, right? Or even somebody made protected bike lanes out of a whole row of plungers. They just put them in the road, right? So there's all sorts of, it's guerrilla tactics is what they call it in urban whatever interventions. The other thing I think that we really need to highlight is that at the Trails Symposium, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about, there's maps of trails and where people want to go and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to come out of it with like, well, the most important thing is, say, a sidewalk on to the senior center. What if we just said our most important thing right now is Pioneer, fix Pioneer, make it walkable? And that's it. That's what you say is your most important thing. And it's not identifying like, here's the small band-aids that we want to get fixed. It's sort of that bigger picture push that's going to inform that master plan that's coming up. I don't know. That's my 2 cents, but I would love to hear more about other people's thoughts.
Julie, why don't you jump in? I know we're going over time, but I know Julie has rounded thoughts. So.
Yeah, thanks. So just having the conversation is super helpful. The city had a meeting yesterday, I believe it was, with our consultant and planning and public works and discussion. And so we are very interested, and the consultant is interested in that people first methodology. We talked about how traditionally traffic modeling and like levels of service was really what drove a plan. And our traffic, consultant said, for a town the size of Homer, that's not really very useful. It's very expensive to put together that type of modeling and not really relevant. So we're definitely hearing your message. Adele's going to be happy because they're going to put together one of those online mapping things so that people can, I know, right? So at the symposium, hopefully we will launch it, but there will be a period, a month, 2 months, that anyone can go online and say, I don't like this intersection right here. It feels unsafe, or I want to be able to go from here to here. So we hope to be able to launch that at the symposium and also have like a paper version at the library for people. Also, one of the transportation engineers will be at the symposium. So that is a potential resource to either flesh out some of these ideas or hear their perspectives so that then we can come up with sort of counter arguments. You also have to know both sides of the story in order to come up with a good methodology of how you're going to solve the problem. So really great things are happening. I appreciate the conversation. Keep it up. This is great timing.
Brad, you had talked about 4 words that were already being used, and I don't know that you ever talked about that in what those mean. And I couldn't even see what the words were.
Oh, sure. And it's people first. I used it at a council meeting to talk just last week. I used the phrase people first. And that seems to have caught on some. It was in the Homer News, apparently. I didn't even talk to them, and here they are like quoting from me from that meeting. So people use people-centered transportation, people-first transportation, people-oriented transportation, or they use human with one of those descriptors. And I think we have time tonight that we're going to actually discuss that more. Is that right?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to hear those.
Okay. They all basically mean the same thing, is that we need to start thinking about people in our transportation systems. And one of the tools that works best is that once you think about how people are going to interact with this space, it becomes a different ballgame. So those like center lines on the roadway that I showed you, anybody who's walking on that road thinks this is made for cars, not for me. I need to walk right on the edge. I need to be careful. I need to let cars pass. You take away those center lines and they become people spaces. And the cars have to worry about, should I be here? Is this one way? How fast should I go? So it changes that dynamic once you start thinking people-centered transportation.
Thank you. So on the agenda, it says what's our slogan and think of ideas. So we are going to discuss it later, and I don't know if people have been putting them in the chat, but it's a good place to place your idea.